Hey everyone, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Monday afternoon. It's not a weekend, it's Memorial Day, so we are going to cover these 12 early games, and there are lineups that aren't out yet. There's a lot to talk about, a lot that we still don't know yet, but I guess we should start with the pitching. Like, Greg, do you like any of these expensive pitchers? Because I can't really get behind any of them.
So here's the deal. I think that there's a pretty good chance that Justin Verlander has a really good game because he's only had really good games this year. He actually hasn't scored less than 20 fantasy points in a single start the entire season. Here's the issue, though. 12,600 is pretty expensive for him. It's a really tough matchup in New York. The thing is, though, is there's so many shitty pitchers going that I think we want to pay up for offenses, and it just doesn't really make sense to roster Verlander. So if there was cheaper offense I would say that Verlander's in play, but just the way it shapes up, I don't want to roster him, and it's just with the hope that he doesn't score 40 fantasy points, which I feel like has happened every time that we faded him this season.
Yeah, watching Verlander rack up strikeouts and complete game shutouts on nights where we don't have him is pretty annoying. But yeah, I don't think he's even a good play if there were cheaper offenses. Like, it's just so much to pay for him. And I'm not sure how much it even matters that Giancarlo Stanton is out. It matters a little for Verlander's downside, but Stanton has been so much worse against righties this year. His WRC plus is something like 3 times as high against lefties. I think the split last time I looked was 240 versus lefties and 80 versus righties. And Stanton, it strikes out a decent amount against righties too. So I don't think it changes the projections for Verlander to such an extreme extent that he's all of a sudden a good play now because Stanton's not playing. The Yankees have a very good offense. They have Gleyber Torres now. Greg Bird is back. So I have zero interest in Verlander. Not that I want to stack the Yankees against him either, but I think this game is pretty fadeable on the Yankees offensive side.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to roster the Yankees hitters against Verlander. I know you usually like to make one stack going up against Verlander when he pitches, but probably not today. So maybe this will be the time that Verlander actually gets hit.
Well, now I'm going to need to do it. Now that you've put that in my head, I'm going to need to make one Yankee stack. I don't think it's the worst idea. Aaron Judge, at least at 4,600, that's a really low price for him. I think that's the cheapest that we've seen Aaron Judge the entire season. So at least as a plug, I think Judge makes sense. And he has been a reverse splits hitter this year. So the righty-righty thing and low ownership. Yeah, I don't hate Judge as a play, but I probably wouldn't make Yankee stacks.
Yeah, like we've got Chris Archer priced all the way up to 9,500. He was in the 6,000s for his last start, a home start against the Red Sox, and he pitched well. So price goes way up for a matchup in Oakland. Don't really like him in that spot. I think it starts to get pretty interesting once we get into the 8,000 range for pitchers. I think the best play on the slate is Caleb Smith at 8,100. He is a great DFS pitcher, gets a ton of strikeouts. He's going up against the Padres, who strike out a ton. So if I'm looking at all the pitchers on the slate, I think he's the one with the most upside for his price and is probably even the safest. How do you feel about Caleb Smith?
Yeah, I actually think Caleb Smith is the best bet to score the most fantasy points today, even independent of price. Like, gun to my head, I maybe would say Verlander outscores Smith, but certainly Smith over anyone else. Like, I think he's a similar quality pitcher and actually a similar type of pitcher to guys like Chris Archer and Gio Gonzalez. And he is an easier matchup than those guys, and he is way cheaper than them. So I think Caleb Smith is definitely a no-brainer. Jacob deGrom's price is insanely high, too. I had initially thought maybe he'd be in play with Ronald Acuna out. He got hurt yesterday, but that's so much for deGrom, and it's still a good Braves offense. So, yeah, I think Smith is the guy that we should expect to score the most points today. For the year, he just has been as good as almost anybody, especially in terms of strikeouts. So he's my favorite pitcher, too. I think there's a lot of value there. One potential, and it's a small concern, is that Hunter Renfroe is expected to be activated today. I'm not even sure if he's going to be in the starting lineup, but Franchi Cordero's out. He got hurt. Renfroe is active. They may just not start him. But either way, the Padres offense is really bad, and Smith should get the strikeouts against them. Even if he doesn't have a great game overall, I think that there's a really high floor because of the strikeouts.
Yeah, he struck out almost 12 hitters per 9 innings. The walks are also high. But he really hasn't had that many bad DFS games just because of the strikeouts, scoring about 18 Draftkings points per game, only needed 16 from hit value, and about as easy a matchup as you could get for a left-handed pitcher. So Another pitcher who I like a decent amount is Luke Weaver. I've liked Luke Weaver a lot this year, and it hasn't worked out more times than it has worked out, although he has pitched better recently. And I think the most encouraging thing about his recent starts, he scored over 20 DraftKings points in 3 consecutive outings. What really hurt him at the beginning of the season was he was walking a ton of guys. And in the month of May, he's cut his strikeout rate in half, and his swing and strike percentage has also gone up. So his swing strike rate is now higher than it was last season. I know that you had talked about before the season, you expected his strikeouts to drop because his swing strike rate was fairly low at 9.5% last year. But now it's at 10%, and it's been trending upward. And with the walks also going down, I think those are pretty promising signs for Luke Weaver. And then also a matchup that can have downside pitching in Milwaukee, but a lot of upside too, because they have not been a great offense this year, even though they acquired a bunch of new players.
Yeah, I think Weaver should pitch well today. I don't really like him because I think there are pitchers that are around the same quality as him that are cheaper and in kind of comparable matchups. But for Weaver specifically, his matchup against the Brewers, this year they're striking out against righties. It's 24.7%, which is the 8th, tied for 7th highest rate in baseball. But they do have a 103 WRC plus versus righties. So yeah, there's upside, there's downside. The park is a concern in Milwaukee. I think if there were less choices, I would like Weaver more. But there are probably 3 pitchers who are cheaper that I just like more than Luke Weaver. So maybe he's my 5th favorite pitcher. Maybe I use him a little bit because of that. So I think it's just a matter of having better options because there are 12 games, and I think there is a lot of good pitching value in this kind of low to mid range.
Yeah, I definitely prefer Caleb Smith to him, and there's other pitchers I like also, but Weaver is somebody who I'm going to have in lineups. So I'm going to try to guess the other guys you like.
All right.
It's probably going to be some of the same guys I like because that's usually how this works.
Yes.
So right off the bat, you don't like Chad Kuhl.
I never liked Chad Kuhl. I can't even imagine a world in which I would like Chad Kuhl. But yeah, facing the Cubs is not really a good matchup for him. And I don't even think he's not even that cheap. He's $7K. So yeah, you're right on that one.
So the 2 pitchers that I like better than Weaver for their prices is Marco Gonzalez at 6,900. I always want to roster somebody who costs 6,900, and then Trevor Cahill at 7,300 at home against the Rays. The Rays haven't been that bad against righties this year, but they also have a really high BABIP. It was over 330 the last I looked, and so that's most of the reason for their success on offense this year. That's definitely going to come down. So Marco Gonzalez and Trevor Cahill, I think, are good plays. Were those the guys you had in mind?
Yep, those are the guys. Marco Gonzalez more than Cahill because the Rangers are so strikeout prone against lefties. And it's a big park downgrade for Texas too. A lot of the reason that we've liked Texas in the last week or so is because they've faced some very bad pitching in their home hitters park, and they've been really inexpensive, but this says nothing about them as an offense. The Rangers offense is very bad, and especially against lefties. I think the strikeout rate is 28%. And Marco Gonzalez has been pretty good this year. I think he's an above-average pitcher, not someone with huge strikeout upside, but he is enough. And against this lineup on the Rangers, I think he should do well. Cahill, yeah, I agree with everything you said on the Rays offense. Even not having Denard Span is a bit of a downgrade too against a righty. Span's been leading off versus righties, and I think they now have Robert Refsnyder playing more or Carlos Gomez playing more. For a right-handed pitcher, that's definitely a boost. And I think Cahill has more strikeout upside than Weaver. I think he definitely has more strikeout upside than Gonzalez. It is an American League game, but I think Cahill is definitely a good play. So those 2 behind Caleb Smith are my 2nd and 3rd favorite pitchers. And then the other guy I like is Domingo Germán. So this is another boom-bust pick, but I think Germán is cheap enough that it's worthwhile to take the shot on him. His swinging strike numbers are really, really high, and his strikeout numbers throughout the minors, his brief time in the majors, it's been really good. So the Astros offense also is striking out more than they have been. It's not some high strikeout rate, but they're right in the middle of the pack at 21.9%. So it's a good offense. They're also missing Alex Bregman today, so that makes them a little more strikeout prone. Bregman's not the greatest hitter, but J.D. Davis is certainly more strikeout prone than Alex Bregman. The one thing Bregman does well is make contact. So Germán has strikeout upside, and I think the line movement for this game is really notable, although it says kind of a decent amount about Justin Verlander too, but I think it also says something about Domingo Germán. The Yankees opened as plus 135 underdogs, The line is now only plus 110, and that's with 75% of the bets on the Astros side. And the over-under for the game has dropped a little bit too. So the Astros implied run total is not that high, and Herman's really cheap. So I think he's worth betting on in at least a couple lineups for a strikeout upside.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern would be, well, for one, the downside. But then I don't know how much salary saving we're going to need just because we're not really using any expensive pitcher. But that also depends on when all the lineups come out and we see what everything looks like.
Yeah, I think there are going to be lineups where we want to use really expensive offense to make some combo stacks of two different expensive teams that I think we'll certainly agree on. So in some of those lineups, I think you will need a little bit more savings. And that's where I would use Herman. But I still have him pretty far behind Caleb Smith first, and then Gonzalez and Trevor Cahill. And I probably Luke Weaver versus Domingo Herman for me. I think it's just a matter of who fits into lineups better. But I think that they're kind of similar bets for their prices.
And then one final thing before we move on from pitchers, because I brought it up. The Rays do have the 5th highest WRC plus in baseball against righties at 108. And a lot of that is because of a 325 BABIP. For reference, there is no other team inside the top 9 with the Cubs are the only other team with a BABIP over 300 in the top 9 offenses. So it's way out of line with the other team. And there's no reason to think that the Rays would be a high BABIP team. They just have a bunch of crappy hitters that are getting on base for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's just about all luck. So yeah, Cahill shouldn't have to. It's not some tough matchup for Cahill, and especially pitching at home in a pitcher's park.
All right, so Eric has a question. I think it's for me. He wants to know what shirt I'm wearing. It's just a Simpsons shirt. I assume that it's. I don't know why I assumed that was a question for me. I think.
Yeah, I have this RotoPros shirt, so I think it's fairly obvious what mine is.
Yeah, Matt's shirt is a lot more explainable than mine. Matt, it's just a RotoPros shirt because that's the. Just
the way the camera is angled, it's kind of hard to see the whole. All of our artwork that we have in our respective T-shirts.
All right, so let's jump into the offenses then. There are so many crappy pitchers. Let's rattle off some of the really bad ones. We have Aaron Sanchez, who struggled this year, pitching in Boston. Has the Red Sox lineup come out yet? Because they've had a bunch of injuries.
Yeah, Mookie Betts is out today. I think he's the only notable inactive. JD Martinez is back in the lineup. I think it was just a day off for him. Yeah, Mookie is not playing today, though.
Okay,
and Xander Bogaerts is in there. Yeah, I missed it. Yeah, Xander is
Sanchez, Dylan Covey, Matt Koch, Homer Bailey, Alex Cobb. I think that's the tier of really crappy pitchers. Is there anybody else you'd put in that group of bad?
Adam Plutko, I think, also makes that group.
Yeah, maybe. I just didn't include him because he's pitching against the White Sox. I guess that shouldn't really matter though, because he still sucks. I just probably wouldn't stack the White Sox in the spot either. Yeah,
agreed. But he probably is as bad as those guys. As far as offenses we're targeting, though, I think the pitchers that you mentioned there, those are the guys that make the most sense to stack against.
All right. So, what do you think should be the priority offense then?
Well, you didn't mention him as one of the worst guys here, but I do think that he's just a notch better than them, and it's a good spot for the offense. So Matt Boyd is pitching against the Tigers. I'm not sure if this is my favorite offense, but it's very, very right-hand heavy, and Boyd's numbers for the year are kind of decent, but he has faced the easiest schedule that I think a pitcher could possibly face. Like, he's been in Cleveland one time, but he's faced the injured Mariners twice. He's faced the Royals twice. He's faced the Rays, the Twins, the Pirates. I mean, Boyd has just benefited, and the Orioles too. It's been, I mean, strength of schedule wise, this has got to be the easiest that any pitcher has had this year. And Boyd has not been good in previous years, and he's giving up a ton of hard contact to righties. And the Angels had a lot of very good righties. None of them are really that expensive outside of Trout. So I think we should just kind of look for the value here and kind of figure out some of this pricing value and at least target the good offenses. And I think the Angels offense versus lefties might make the most sense. It's also a warm day in Detroit, so it might play a little more like a hitter's park.
Yeah, so the issue I have here, definitely, like, Justin Upton's way too cheap, but is that there's so many pitchers that are worse than Matt Boyd. So I think that I would definitely want to have like Trout and Upton lineups. I don't know how many full Angel stacks I would make, especially because there's so many hitters they have that I just don't like.
Yeah, so the other benefit for them, though, is that the Tigers definitely have as bad of a bullpen as any team can have.
Yeah, that is true. Also, the Tigers bullpen does suck. Boyd has been okay this year. I would say definitely I will use Trout and Upton as plugs, but I don't think that I'm going to make full stacks of them. One question from Dan OMS. Is Max Fried in play today against the Mets? They strike out a lot against left-handed pitching. So here's the issue I have with two issues with Fried. Number one, he's not been good this year. He's also only pitched 6 innings. The other thing also is that he's been coming out of the bullpen. He hasn't made any starts this year. So he made a few starts in the minor leagues. He only averaged about 5 innings per start. But considering he's been pitching out of the bullpen, I'm a little concerned that he's going to have a pitch count and isn't going to be allowed to work deep into games. And then the other thing also on top of that is that I just had a thought. I totally lost my train of thought. So
I think it's probably that we don't need the salary savings. I think that's the biggest.
I was going to say there are a lot of other cheap pitchers we like. So a lot of times it's hard to find cheap pitchers that we really feel comfortable with, or we think are good plays. I think there's enough guys in that price range that we've mentioned already, like Caleb Smith, Trevor Cahill, Domingo Germán. It could be worth a punt on. That I don't think that we need to stretch for Max Fried. I would say that maybe I would take a chance on if there was other pitchers I didn't like in that price range. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, it is a good spot for him. And Wilmer Flores is out for the Mets, so it's really a bad lineup here against lefties. But yeah, I don't know how long Fried will pitch for. My guess would be 4 or 5 innings. There's also a little bit of mid-game delay concern with the weather there in Atlanta, chance for rain. So Max Fried is definitely not someone who would come back in a game after a rain delay unless he has like a perfect game going or something. But yeah, I think there's good value on his price tag. We just don't need the value on that price tag.
All right. One other question from Gene. Who's pitching for the Mets in the second game? They have not named a starter yet.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be Seth Lugo, but it might just be kind of a bullpen game. I thought I saw Lugo somewhere, though.
Jose Bautista batting cleanup in a revenge game. I think every game is a revenge game for Jose Bautista at this point, because I think he should have revenge against former teams he's played on. And then also it's revenge for every team that wouldn't sign him, which is every single team in baseball in the offseason. So vengeance for him against everybody. He's very angry when he plays.
There are enough good offenses today that we should not make our lineups based on revenge. That is, I'm 100% sure of that.
Jake Lamb versus Homer Bailey. Yes, that is going to be a good spot.
Hard to disagree with that.
I think everybody versus Homer Bailey is going to be good. Do we know, is the roof going to be open or closed in Arizona?
It's closed. Yeah, it's disappointing because I really like that game. That probably is the best value game for offense, and I think those are the 2 worst pitchers pitching today. Let's just talk about that game first. Matt Cook had an 8.40 ERA at AAA last season in the minors. And his peripherals, they weren't even that much better than that. He wasn't even that unlucky to have an 8.40 ERA. He somehow has a 3.77 ERA in the majors this year, but his peripherals are just awful. He is the worst pitcher that's pitching today. I feel pretty good about that. Dylan Covey and Homer Bailey could make a run at that, but I think Matt Cook is worse. The humidor is definitely a concern, and the Reds aren't that cheap, but I think the Reds offense should score more than the Diamondbacks offense. It's just there's more pricing value on Arizona. So which offense of those 2 do you prefer?
It's still the Arizona offense for me just because they're home and Homer Bailey's on the other side. I guess it's hard to say that
Homer Bailey is not worse than Matt Cook. I don't even know. You can't – it's really hard to make –
The difference I think is that at least Matt Cook gets a lot of ground balls where Homer Bailey gives up a lot of fly balls and a lot of home runs.
Yeah, Matt Cook has something like a 50% hard contact rate over the last 2 years, though.
Yeah,
they're not softly hit ground balls.
I mean, both of them suck. I think it's really hard to distinguish between who the best high-end offense is. I would say the Indians, except the Indians are also more expensive than everybody else. So that makes them not quite.
I think we can fit them though. I've kind of played around with it a little bit. You can pretty easily fit Indian stacks if you use Caleb Smith and then a second pitcher who's cheaper than Caleb Smith.
So I think the way I'm looking at it right now is I just want to have some exposure to all these offenses, and I don't think there's going to be one that I'm way higher on than the others. But I think it'll be some Indians, some Diamondbacks, some Reds, and some Red Sox. And I'm kind of thinking that just splitting those 4 up evenly right now.
Yeah, I favor the Angels a little bit more than the Red Sox because I think there's a lot of pricing value there. And I think stacking makes more sense actually than plugs because if they get past Matt Boyd, they're facing some really, really bad relievers. So my 4 favorite stacks would be Indians, Angels, Reds, and Diamondbacks. And I think the Red Sox, I'd kind of rather have plugs there. It's also just a really expensive offense. Like I think Boston is more expensive than Cleveland top to bottom. It's kind of close. It's also not that conducive of a hitting day in Boston today with the weather it's about 60 degrees, wind blowing in a little bit. Fenway's generally a pitcher's park anyway. Benintendi at 5,000 is a lot. I like the Red Sox too, though, but I think they're my 5th favorite behind the Indians, Angels, Reds, and Diamondbacks. But I certainly agree with you that kind of just making a few stacks of each of these teams is the way to go, and keeping a pretty narrow pitching core of maybe 3, 4, maybe 5, but probably just 3 or 4 of the pitchers. Do you include the Nationals here? Because I kind of just think they're a little too pricey, and Alex Cobb probably isn't as bad as some of these other guys.
Well, here's what I think. I think Alex Cobb probably is as bad as some of those other guys.
I think he's more like Aaron Sanchez than he is like Homer Bailey, Dylan Covey, and Matt Cook. Like I think that's the next tier of just slightly less terrible than some of the really, really bad guys.
I mean, I definitely think this would be so much easier if the game was being played in Washington than in Baltimore.
Yeah, the park upgrade for the Nationals. It isn't that hot today in Baltimore though. It's in the 60s, so maybe the ball won't carry quite that much. It's not that good of a Nationals offense either. Like they've had some really bad games against some really bad pitchers. Most notably, they were awful against Eric Lauer and Wei-Yin Chen in the last 5 days or so. But their numbers for the year just aren't all that impressive. Versus righties, let's see, they are 26th in strikeout rate. They have a 104 WRC plus. I guess they're kind of decent, but they're not as good of an offense, I think, as people think they are.
Yeah, I think so. Looking at them, I think the biggest issue I have is they really don't have that many hitters I like that much. So I don't think I would make 5-man national stacks either, but I would definitely use like 3 of them as a secondary stack. The guys who I like are Turner, Harper, Rendon, Matt Adams, and then maybe Juan Soto at 3,900 if I'm really stretching. I don't really like Mark Reynolds at 3,800. He's had a couple of good games this year, except overall, Mark Reynolds has not been a good hitter for the last few years, so I don't really expect him to be a great hitter this year. There's been points where I've rostered him, except he was like 2,700 or something like that at one point. So I think the Nationals probably don't quite make the cut. And it's not even because I think it's a bad spot or I think they couldn't put up a lot of runs. It's just there's so many good offenses to pick from.
Yeah, I think Bryce Harper is a good plug. I mean, for Turner, Rendon, I think Lindor and Jose Ramirez are just better plays at shortstop and third. And about the same prices. So, yeah, I think they kind of just missed the cut, too. I think they would be the next offense to look at. For whatever reason, there's also a bunch of sharp money on the Orioles for today. I think it kind of is just a knock on Gio Gonzalez, though, who has maybe pitched a little above his head this year. But the line has moved from plus 135 to plus 115 for the Orioles very, very strongly against the public. I do think, though, that says more about Baltimore's offense. As a contrarian stack, I don't think the Orioles offense is the worst play. They aren't that cheap, though. So maybe we don't need to reach too much for offense here. There are plenty of good spots.
All right. Well, here's one question I think you're going to like a lot. Do you like rostering Cubs lefties against Chad Kuhl today?
I think Tommy La Stella is a good play at 2,500, although he is actually a reverse splits hitter. The Cubs don't really have too many lefties. It's Anthony Rizzo and Kyle Schwarber.
And La Stella and Zobrist.
Oh, yeah, and Zobrist is going to bat from the left side of the plate. Yeah, I don't actually like it that much today because I think there are just better plays. There are better values. But if you are in a lineup where you need savings, I think La Stella that's really cheap for anyone batting second at 2,500. But I'm definitely not going out of my way to roster Anthony Rizzo and Kyle Schwarber. I mean, at first base, Joey Votto and, Paul Goldschmidt. It's hard to say he's a good play ever against anyone this year. But Joey Votto, I think he's cheaper than Rizzo against a worse pitcher in probably a better park. So, yeah, I actually think the Cubs I usually am stacking against Chad Kuhl. I don't think it makes much sense today.
Yeah, I mean, something else to keep in mind too is a lot of times I think we exaggerate when we talk about, oh, this guy sucks, this guy's really good, because a lot of it I think we're making judgments based on expectations. So a lot of times we'll talk about Chad Kuhl, and Matt might say he sucks, except it's more along the lines of he sucks compared to what people think of him. We don't think he sucks compared to like Matt Koch or Dylan Covey or Homer Bailey. Like there's levels of sucking.
Right. Chad Kuhl is kind of thought of as like a 3 or 4 starter, and maybe he's a 5 starter or should just be like a long reliever. Bailey, Cook, and Covey should not be in the major leagues. Kuhl is definitely at least a couple notches ahead of those guys.
Yeah, he's like a slightly below average starter. Like he's somebody who's going to put up an ERA in the low to mid 4s every year. So not somebody you'd be like, oh, this guy's great, except it's just that he's not somebody who like you need a roster all the time in DFS or something like that.
Right, and no one would ever argue that you should be rostering Homer Bailey. So, yeah, I think that tells you all you need to know. Chad Kuhl gets rostered a little too often. Homer Bailey is never even consideration for lineups.
All right, so let's just recap really quick because I think we got all the questions out of the way.
Yep.
So pitchers for me and for you, Caleb Smith is definitely the best pitcher. I like Luke Weaver. You were a little lower on him than me, except he's still not a priority play for me. I just think he's somebody worth having in the player pool. And then if you have a spot where you have extra money to spend, I think it makes sense to go up to him. And then Trevor Cahill and what was the
Marco Gonzalez. Do you think the pecking order for both of us is Smith, then Gonzalez, then Cahill, and then Weaver? I guess maybe Herman above Weaver for me, but for those first 3 guys, do you think the order is kind of like that?
Yeah, that's what it is for me as well. And then getting into offenses, I think that we like those cheap pitchers. I think it just makes sense to spread some of these expensive offenses. I guess we didn't really talk about them too much, but really good play. The Indians still at home against Dylan Covey. Then the Diamondbacks, the Reds. Are you going to make 5-man Angel stacks?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think I'll include Jeffrey Marte. I kind of wanted to mention this before. Marte over Pujols. He's cheaper, and he's a way better hitter, especially against lefties. Albert Pujols is not a good hitter. And I think Marte will have way lower ownership. He's not someone who's going to be that chalky today. Chris Young, too, is 2,400. This is a very cheap Angels lineup top to bottom, and it's all right-handed against a bad lefty, or I guess maybe just a slightly below average lefty and an awful bullpen. Yeah, I definitely think Angels stacks make sense, but I think Indians number 1, Diamondbacks and Reds are kind of number 2 and 3. I think I have the Reds a little ahead. You may have the Diamondbacks a little ahead, but those are the top 3. And then I think Angels are number 4 for me, Red Sox 5. You just have Red Sox as 4 and Angels as plugs. Is that still where you stand?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure I'm actually going to make full Red Sox stacks though. Like my 3 favorite offenses are definitely Indians, Diamondbacks, Reds. And then I'll kind of see what happens once I start making the
maybe they'll open the roof mid game in Arizona, because that's not an impossible thing. They're starting with the roof closed. So if you want to watch the game and just root for them to open the roof, that would be very helpful for us.
All right. So any final thoughts?
Nope. I think that's it. Yeah, 12 games, but we actually have a sort of narrow focus, which I'm kind of surprised about.
All right. So that will finish the show. Go to rotopros.com and you could sign up for a subscription on the plans page. And we'll be back to record our podcast tonight for tomorrow's slate.